Hi, everyone. Welcome. It is so good to see the numbers of participants moving up and up. We are so glad that you are here, and I am grateful to be spending this time with you all today. I want you to know that all of you taking this hour to watch this, whether it's live or on our YouTube channel later on, is such an honor. Today's session is part of our Good Grief Community webinar series. So essentially every school year, but also every program year for us here at Good Grief, we bring you content, we bring you experts, information as a way to extend the work that we do outside of our centers and into the virtual space. Anyone who has attended today's session live will receive a certificate of attendance within the next 48 hours to show our appreciation. But as we let folks kind of land into the space and we get our session going, please hop in the chat. I would love to know where you all are from. So if you are from New Jersey, if you're from Good Grief, if you're from another state, another country, another org, we'd love to know. And in the chat, if you select everyone will be able to see. If you have a secret just for the panelists, you can just select host and panelists and only we will see it. Yes, all right, so I see the chat. The chat is moving. If possible, there's definitely some power in having a pencil or a pen and some paper for a session like this. So just give folks a moment to check in. Hey, we've got Good Grief facilitators who've moved out of state. All over. Yes, please grab something to write with if you have not already. Hey, Canada, Missouri, Massachusetts. Hello. All right. So I'm going to get this rolling, but please do not stop checking in the chat. I love seeing you all connecting with one another and getting a better idea of where everyone is from. So for those of you who maybe this is your first webinar, welcome. We are Good Grief. Our mission is to build resilience in children, strengthen families, and empower communities to grow from loss and adversity. For most of our organization's history, we have been providing completely free and unlimited peer support programs to grieving children and their families, starting at as young as 3, all the way through young adulthood, so age 30 with our kids. And we do this in our centers. We have one in Morristown, New Jersey, one in Princeton, New Jersey, and we've been running some virtual sessions pretty much since COVID had started. But in recent years, our work has been growing through education, through advocacy. We want to bring training, curriculum, resources to all the spaces where people are, where grievers might be, where communities might want to be able to be better supports for one another, because we all do face loss and adversity. This is the big picture view of our work. We have our nights of support that we do in our centers, our Good Grief schools. Every spring, we do an in-person event called a Good Grief Spring Institute. So if you happen to be in New Jersey next March, we would love to see you. We do professional development and training, both in person and virtually over Zoom, parent and caregiver education. We work with funeral homes. And then we have this webinar series that you're in right now. This is probably where I spend the most of my time is with Good Grief schools. We empower schools to run their own grief groups, professional development, and social emotional learning curriculum. But enough about Good Grief. I want you all to have time to really engage with this topic. I'm very excited for what you'll be doing today and for our presenter. So this is our presenter today. We have Dr. Neena Verma. She is an appreciative inquiry thought leader. She is a grief and growth specialist. She's a journal and poetry therapy coach and facilitator. Neena is a certified coach. She runs this really cool independent library movement in sacred remembrance of her son for children in India. She's authored 2 books, and there's a 3rd on the way. And she combines her subject matter expertise with the wisdom she's gained from her long professional practice, but also her own lived wisdom as a bereaved mother. So I will let you take it away.
Namaste and good morning. Is it already good afternoon to everyone there? Whatever time zone you come from, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. I'm logging in from New Delhi, India. So it's 9:35 p.m. for me. Um, I'm very happy to be here. Um, the work that Good Grief does is so important. The work that you're doing in the world is so noble and so important. And I'm happy to contribute in my humble, tiny way. So without much ado, let me just start with today's work. So with this, I can share my screen, right, Evelyn?
Yes, I see your screen.
Let me put it on slideshow.
Mhm.
So as you know that this is a session that we are today going to be going through. We'll cover things like, what really is grief. So we'll not get into much depth of it because I kind of assume that the audience today that we have either know grief from their own personal experience, or maybe they work as grief practitioners, as coaches, counselors, therapists, or educators in the grief space. So they have familiarity with this, but nonetheless, I'll touch upon this. And then I will take you straight into what in the context of grief, what really journaling, how do we do that, and why we should get into that. So let me begin with a verse from Srimad Bhagavad Gita. It's a Hindu scripture, but I think it is well known all over the world. In fact, much research has been done using Bhagavad Gita, juxtaposing it with leadership and all, some other, management themes. Much research has been done in the United States and other parts of the world, studying the Srimad Bhagavad Gita and its essence. Now, this is part of a big verse. This is just one tiny part from a complete verse. It says, Jatasya hi dhruvo mrityur dhruvam. Death is certain for one who has been born. This verse appears in chapter 2 of the scripture. This is verse number 27. I would invite you to just pause here for a moment and allow the essence of this verse to be absorbed by you, to see how these words land on you, especially for those for whom grief is raw, whether it is fresh or it is from lingering from some time. But, especially for those for whom grief is raw, it's personal. It's something really intimate for you as an experience. But even for those for whom there is some familiarity with the experience and the process of grief in any way, just allow the essence of these words to touch you. Maybe in a word or two, some of you may like to share, what is it doing to you? What are these words doing to you? Are they stirring any feelings or thoughts? Maybe in a word or two, you could put your reflections or feelings in the chat box for all of us to read. Sense of mortality. I think we spend so much time trying to not think of this truth. Sadness, overwhelmed by the eternal truth. Inevitability. Indeed, inevitability of this eternal truth. It is a fact of life, as Jill has mentioned, Jemmy has mentioned. Yes, death is a fact of life. The thing is that we think of death the opposite of life. Death is perhaps, in whatever way we can think of it as an opposite, it is opposite of birth, not of life. Birth and death both are the most significant events of life. In between birth and death, the drama of life unfolds. What happens is that in our mistaken understanding or mistaken impression of taking death as opposite of life, we become so, we find it so difficult to absorb the hard truth of the inevitability that at some point in time, life will culminate into death. But it is true. Now, let me put it in slightly simpler terms. This is a quotation by Guru Rabindranath Tagore, the first Nobel laureate from India. He was a phenomenal artist, a writer, a poet, a social reformer, a thinker. He was the first to start integral education in India in 1930s. So these are lines from one of his poetry, very beautiful lines. Death belongs to life as birth does. And this is what I meant by this, that both death and birth are parts of life. The walk is in the raising of the foot, as in the laying of it down. True, but so hard to come to terms with this truth. Those of us who have experienced this truth firsthand by the loss of a dear one or loved one, those of us who have experienced bereavement or loss by death, know what the taste of grief is like. Loss, as we just discovered, is the intricate warp and weft of life, and grief is a natural and normal response to loss. When we taste it, we realize that, of course, it's a universal phenomenon, but its taste is so uniquely personal to each one of us. It's not a happy taste or a nice taste. It's not a taste that anyone wants, but it's a taste that everyone has to, at some point in time in life, be willing to absorb, to inhale, and to come to terms with. Grief is a sovereign process. It happens at its own pace, at its own mood, at its own rhythm, ebb and flow. Some days it would be coming to you like a gentle wave at the shore, just touching, caressing your feet and fading away. And someday it will be a tsunami that will crash on you and overwhelm you and sweep everything away. So it's a sovereign process. There's no way we can predict it. There's no way we can kind of guess it. There's no way we can fix it. Grief is not meant to be fixed. There's so many myths and misconceptions around grief. The most common is that 5 stages model by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. Now, the interesting thing is that Elizabeth Kubler-Ross never created that model with grief in mind. It was meant for those dying and the end of life experiences. But at a later point in time, even she found her model to be not really very adequate or not really very neatly applicable to the context of even those dying or the end of life experiences. In the context of grief, that, those fixed stages in a linear order, it just does not work. We all know, those who have experienced grief, those who live with it, we know that it doesn't work by way of fixed stages in a linear sequential way. This is the biggest misconception. Then there's another misconception that time heals. Of course it can, and it does, but time doesn't heal by itself. We endeavor to start healing by ourselves. Since it happens over a period of time, there's a misconception that it is time that will heal you. No, you will heal yourself. It's an active endeavor. It's not a passive thing that you sit and something will come and heal you. Of course, there will be environmental things around you And there will be some other experiences in life that may facilitate your healing and regrowing process. But basically, it is an endeavor that the grievers take themselves. Then they talk about letting go, about moving on, about being brave, about being strong. If you're companioning somebody in grief, please know that these are cliches and platitudes that do not help. Definitely not as a standard utterance across different kind of situations, different kind of grievers. When a griever is totally immersed in grief, it just does not make sense for the griever to be doled out these platitudes and, cliches like move on, be strong, be brave, time will heal, let go. How do you let go of grief? Grief is the expression, is the cry of love. Letting go of grief means letting go of your love. You don't let go of grief, you learn to assimilate it into your life trajectory. And once you start to assimilate it in your life trajectory, the grief starts to unfold in a way that learns to live with you and you learn to live with it. And then it starts to open space up for growth, new growth, post-traumatic growth. You don't fix it. You don't let go of it like this, pushing it out of your life. You learn to live with it. You learn to assimilate it in your life. It takes various forms. There's ambiguous grief on account of ambiguous losses. So maybe, for example, somebody is, somebody is physically there, but not psychologically or energy-wise there. So dementia or comatose patients. So the person is still there, but not there. So there's an ambiguity about the sense of loss, and therefore there's a kind of anticipatory grief as well as ambiguous grief. You're in a way grieving the not being there of the person, even though the person is there, and yet you do not know how to come to terms with that very vague experience of what is this grief all about. Then there's anticipatory, clear anticipatory grief in case of, those battling terminally ill conditions, and the caregivers and the families. For them, the death is imminent. It's perhaps staring in the face, and they can anticipate the loss. But to be able to anticipate grief, it's so hard. No matter how much you prepare yourself, it is so hard to anticipate the experience of grief and to be able to prepare yourself for that. Very, very hard. Then there's, disenfranchised grief, which is on account of the losses which do not get social approval or social space to be grieved or mourned. So loss of pregnancy, stillbirth, these are kind of things, miscarriages, these are kind of things which I don't know about the US or the North Americas or the Europe for sure, but I do have an idea that even in your societies, in your cultures, but definitely in India, these are kind of things which are treated more like physiological events. And therefore, the woman who's lost it, lost the pregnancy, lost the unborn baby, lost the stillborn baby, is still going through a process of grief and experience of grief. She's in mourning, but she's expected to get going back on the track of life because this is seen more like a physiological event. So her grief gets disenfranchised. Then there could be, stigmatized losses, like maybe two people are in a relationship which is either not yet made open in public or has not yet got any social sanction. And therefore, when one partner goes, the other partner does not get a social approval or a social support to allow their grief and expression. And then there are some other stigmatized losses like, death by suicide or death by overdose. And these are kind of deaths which do not create a space where very many people are willing to come and companion us in our grief journey. Everybody wants us to kind of hush it up and just wrap this process up and move further or move on in typical common language, move on from there. So these are kinds of disenfranchised. And then there is ultimate bereavement. Ultimate bereavement, the loss of child. Every bereavement is difficult. Every grief is hard. And yet the loss of child is something that, not without reason, is called ultimate bereavement. The grief on account of loss of child is something that is, for most people, it just comes to live with you. Very often, I do a lot of work with bereaved parents. Very often I've seen that there's no closure to the grief of a bereaved parent. It prolongs. So it takes, and there are multi-level reactions. There are reactions at mental level, at physical level, at emotional level, spiritual level, relational level, social level. At all levels, we have reactions. And the emotional level, especially, the emotions come entangled like a ball, they're knotted like a ball. It's so hard to differentiate between emotions. It's so hard to be able to name what you're going through, to be able to sense whether it is pain or fear or despair or shock or anger. What is it really? Or is it all of them? And then there is another G, which is really hard G to come to terms with. That is the G of guilt. This survivor guilt for most people, especially those who are bereaved by the loved one dying of a terminally ill condition or of an accident or something like that. So there's always some kind of a nagging feeling that we didn't do enough, or what if I had done this or if I had done that. So there's always some kind of a nagging regret or nagging question that's lingering in your mind, and that creates a sense of vague grief, which is laden more with guilt and of course with sadness and trauma, but also the guilt is what is sitting heavy on that. Many of us have experienced this during Corona, and guilt was actually on account of both the things, that we didn't know what our loved ones were going through in the hospitals, in the hospital systems. Even those who were at home, in the isolation, we were feeling so limited, so helpless, not knowing how to reach out to our loved ones who were isolated within home or sheltered in a corner of the home. And the burials and the funerals and the cremations, they were so hard, lacking all dignity, lacking all emotional connection. It was so hard to come to terms with the kind of cremations and the burials and the funerals that have happened. In India, I know for sure that at one point in time, the crematoriums did not have space for, and people were waiting in lines, in queues, and there were volunteers who were offering to cremate the bodies because there were some families who just could not afford to step out, and they did not even get to have the last glimpse and the last glance. This kind of a grief, in all likelihood, will perhaps turn acute and complicated and traumatic, that you don't even get to see. It's a uniquely complicated grief. In such a situation, it would rather be unkind if you were to go and tell the person, let go. Grief is completely enveloped and engulfed their whole being. You can't ask them to let go just like that. It will happen. But with that, and before that, some other things will have to happen. Finally, grief is a journey, and sometimes with no closure. That also is fine, as long as the griever has not developed some medical or pathological complications which need professional intervention, a medical intervention or therapeutic intervention. If that is the case, then of course we need to address that. But even in the normal grief, very often there's no closure, and that is absolutely fine. Now, I invite you to read this quote. And part of your answer, like why grief journaling, why we should write about our grief, would perhaps be answered by this. Put it somewhere else, because your body is not a coffin for pain to be buried in. Those of you know who work in the trauma space or are familiar with Dr. Vanberg's work, his famous book by the name Body Keeps the Score. I encourage you to read it if you have not read it already, those of you who work in trauma space. He's made a very emphatic case for addressing the trauma that resides in our body quietly, and it keeps wrecking our system from within. And how to get that trauma out and start addressing it and healing it. So put it somewhere else. Put it in arts, put it in music, put it in some other creative mode, put it in meditation, put it in nature walks or nature engagement, or put it in writing. So today we are going to talk about how we can put our grief in writing. This is another beautiful quote from Shakespeare. I 100% believe that. I have personally experienced, yes, thank you, Evelyn. The body keeps the score. So I have personally experienced the therapeutic value of allowing my sorrow to take the form of words. And with that, I started to release quite a bit of the bottled energy within, which was in some ways also wrecking my physiological system. So why grief journaling? Because grief is often a lonely journey. No matter how many good-willed, good-intentioned people live with you or appear in your life, quite often it happens that it is hard for you to explain what you're going through, to be able to describe what you're going through. And it is even harder for others to be able to understand and sense where you are coming from. Sometimes they genuinely want to reach out to you and help you, but there's either a sense of awkwardness or they don't know really. Why? Because we are not individually attuned or socially groomed to be around those who are in grief. So it becomes at some point a very, very lonely journey. And writing makes you feel less alone. Writing allows expression to your deepest feelings, feelings that we are unable to tell others or others are unable to understand. It helps you make sense of your loss and your grief. This cathartic and therapeutic effect of grief. And it facilitates post-traumatic growth. It inspires you to reconstruct your life, the meaning in your life, the meaning of your life, with your loss-altered reality. Because there is a crisis of faith sometimes, because our assumptive world comes crashing with the loss. Certain things that we believe, if you do good, no wrong will happen to you. And if you, God forbid, if somebody has had a traumatic bereavement, bereavement by accident or by an unnatural incident or by violence or by crime, suddenly you start questioning, why did this happen to me? So there's an assumptive world of beliefs that can come crashing. So writing also inspires you to reconstruct meaning in your life after the loss, in the aftermath of grief, meaning of your life. Now, how to do it? I have talked about it on page 183 of my book, Grief, Growth, Grace, A Sacred Pilgrimage. I would encourage you to maybe read it there, but just to kind of recap it from there. I would encourage you to create a grief journal. I did not. I was writing on random pieces here and there. Whenever something was bubbling to burst out from me, I would just pick up anything and write here and there. Much of that got lost, but much of that was also somehow, I could relocate it and I could preserve it. And it made so much difference to me. When I reread what I had written, it was so cathartic for me. So I would encourage you to create a journal. You can yourself, bind some loose sheets, do them up your way. It could be a notebook. If you intend to do some doodling and some artwork along with writing, pick up an art book, whatever feels right for you. Prefer writing by hand. Why? Because the sensory experience has a certain therapeutic effect. When our kinesthetic senses are connecting with our visual senses, we are reading, When we write, and then simultaneously we are reading what we are writing in our heads. So there's an auditory sense stimulation, there's a visual sense stimulation, and there's a kinesthetic. It's a very tactile experience. This experience is very alive. If you write in hand, I would encourage you to do that. But if you feel comfortable writing on the device, that's okay. Make yourself comfortable. Start by writing in small bits, as and when you feel like. Don't load yourself with another task, because in the aftermath of grief, almost everything becomes like a task, from taking your everyday shower to preparing meals for yourself or somebody else and attending to the daily routines of life. Everything feels like such a heavy task, such a burdensome task. So don't add one more task to it. Don't take it up like a task. Write as and when you feel like. Sometimes you may not feel like writing even for days together, that's okay. Sometimes on certain days, you might find yourself immersed in writing, that too is okay. So start by writing as and when you feel like. Slowly try to create a habit. And then for that habit, I would encourage you to devote 15 to 20 minutes every day. If you want to do more, I would encourage you to do it in shorter spells. One spell, 15 to 20 minutes. About 4 to 5 times a week, or 4 to 5 days a week. There's no topic to write on. Whatever emerges in the moment for you is the right topic. Write without lifting your pen, no edit, no censoring, no self-shaming, no judgment, no limiting yourself, no worrying about grammar. Whatever emerges is welcome and sacred. If something emerges as an afterthought, don't erase what you have written already. Add that afterthought later. So, no editing, just write without lifting pen. And it is okay to sometimes use a guiding prompt if you're feeling blank but you still want to write. It is okay to use a guiding prompt. If it helps, write in third person. However, I would encourage you to write in first person, because that has a deeper therapeutic value. At the end of a week or fortnight or month, whenever you feel more comfortable, just flip through what you have written. It may bring some tears. And lo and behold, it might surprise you. It might also bring some smiles of remembrances, some smiles of some very nice, happy memories. Whatever comes, honor it. There's a beautiful poetry by Rumi called Guest House. I would encourage you to read that. That says that every emotion that comes, treat your being like a guest house, and every emotion that comes at the doors of the guest house, welcome it. Be it pain, be it fear, because every emotion is a messenger from beyond. So whatever comes up, honor it. Tears, smiles, or maybe greater pain, or maybe a sense of catharsis. Whatever comes, honor it. Witness it and honor it. Let your words create worlds of healing, of meaning, and growth. Do not expect anything from it, but whatever emerges, take this as a message from your deeper layers of being, from beyond. We really don't know what the unconscious is trying to convey to you. Maybe the meaning will, or the pattern will become clearer to you after a while, when you start seeing that some kind of patterns are emerging in your writing. But every time you write, do not expect some insights or some lessons or some releases to definitely emerge. Just flow with your experience of writing. So this is, I would encourage you to do brief journaling. There are various ways and forms it can take. In the beginning, some people for whom journaling is a new experience find it difficult to start writing in stream of consciousness, free writing way. So you could start with structured, you could create a list of the things your deceased loved one loved. You could create a list of, the nice memories you have with them. You could create a list of the significant events in their lives and write about each event separately. You could create list poems. So for example, fill it up, letting go. Letting go is so hard for me. Holding on keeps me closer to my deceased loved one. Like that, keep repeating, list poem. First line, letting go, fill it up. Second line, holding on, fill it up. Third line, again, letting go, fill it up. Holding on. This is just one example, but you could, put in something. I fear something. Then I love something. Again, I fear, I love something. Then you can create alpha poems. So for example, pick up the name of your deceased loved one. Say, my name is Neena. You could create an alpha poem starting with the letters, different letters of my name. So Neena, start something with N, then start something with E, then N, then A, or maybe, an emotion that is emerging strong for you. So that emotion perhaps is pain. Create an alpha poem with pain as an acronym. Stepping stones, you could go back in time and reminisce about the events, significant events, the transitions. You could write about a moment, you go back in time and there's a moment that is so special for you, so very powerful for you. Go back in time, recall it, relive that experience, and then capture that moment in writing. It's a powerful way to reminisce and recall and remember that memory. Found art or poetry, and sometimes we see found art in skies, in the clouds. Things appear for us. And it is not uncommon for many bereaved people, many grievers, to actually see faces of their deceased loved one in water that has ripples, or in clouds, or in skies, or in other silhouettes of nature. It's not uncommon at all, and this is normal. You could create specific journals. So for example, if pain is the strongest feeling for you, you could create a journal for that. You could also work with pictures. Maybe, a particular picture of your deceased loved one is doing something really powerful to you. Maybe it is stimulating a deeper sense of pain, or maybe it is allowing you to talk to your grief, or be with your grief, or talk to your deceased loved one, or reminisce back in time. Whatever it is, don't ignore it. If that picture is the prompt, take it as a prompt. Then slowly you start moving towards less or unstructured ways and forms of writing. So there's an imaginal conversation. You can have a conversation with your deceased loved one, or a good companion who's giving you good support, good solace in your grief journey. Or you could also have an imaginal conversation with a particular feeling. So at one point in time, I was completely engulfed with my guilt, and I had an imaginal conversation with my guilt. That led me to another imaginal conversation with forgiveness. So you can have imaginal conversations with your emotions. You could write an unsent letter. You could write a goodbye letter, especially those who are bereaved with corona, or in some other way where the goodbyes did not happen. In my case, the goodbye did not happen. My bereavement was so sudden and so unexpected and untimely. There was no goodbye. So it's very hard. It is not easy, let me tell you. I don't mean to scare you, but I do mean to prepare you. It's hard. Or maybe for you, it is easy. Hard or easy, whichever way it will be. But it is deeply therapeutic. It really helps in coming to terms with loss. Then reflection writes. That is like, if you remember last slide, I told you that after a week or fortnight or a month, you just flip through what you have written and then you read. And when you read, some fresh thoughts and feelings may emerge when you read what you have written. So those fresh feelings and thoughts also become your reflection rights. Write about them. Maybe a particular piece that you have written, now you have another different perspective about that. Write that perspective also, new perspective. Eventually, some people start to write in stream of consciousness. The poetry begins to emerge. A story or narrative starts to build. And for all you know, sometimes your writing even culminates in a grief memoir, like for me, it did. In my grief memoir called A Mother's Cry, A Mother's Celebration. So let's get to do some writing. Time to write for your brief affirmation. We'll spend about 5 to 7 minutes on this. Now, either you take a prompt from the first list, choice is yours. I'm presenting you a lot of choice. Or maybe you have a picture nearby, contemplate over a picture. That picture may be of your deceased loved one, or both of you in the frame. A picture which has some kind of an impact on you in the context of your grief. So contemplate over a picture, meditate over it. Just get in touch with what is it doing to you? What is it saying to you? What is it asking you or inviting you to be or do? Or maybe there's a particular movement that is standing out for you right now. Go back in time, reminisce about that and capture it in words. Maybe you want to write a letter to a particular emotion or to your deceased loved one or to somebody else or to yourself. Who knows? So write a letter. Maybe you want to write a list poem. Remember the prompt that I gave you? Letting on, holding, letting go, holding on. You could also make it letting go, letting come. So, or like I said, I fear, I have faith in. So one line could be, I fear, ... The other could be, I have faith in, ... Or I love. Pick yourself and keep alternating them. So let's do some writing. I'm putting the slide up only. Take about, say, 5 to 7 minutes and let your hand just flow. No edit, no censoring, no stopping. Take about 7 minutes. Max, 5 to 7 minutes. Okay. So, Evelyn, is it possible that we can invite one or two participants to just briefly share their experience?
Well, we have them set up as a webinar, but we could
Okay, no
possibly
problem.
promote.
Maybe if we can invite, write their experiences in one or two words in the chat box, and we will read out few. So, may I invite everyone to just write few words, 2-3 words of how the experience was. Freeing. I feel lighter. Cleansing. At peace. Meaningful, clear, powerful, made me cry. Painful, but as someone said, cleansing. I wrote a thank you list and it helped me come to terms. Wonderful. I wrote so much more than I thought I would. First time I write how I feel. Helpful, getting thoughts straight. Love the thank you list. Oh, we can go on and on. Maybe just kind of also text which particular prompt you took. So just keep texting while I'm move forward to the next slide. Now, one thing about grief, something that we often do not notice and most people do not talk about, is that grief has an existential pilgrim in post-traumatic growth. But mind you, there's no grief to growth. There's no from grief to growth. It's not like we leave grief somewhere behind at some point and then we start to have growth. Both can happen and they often do happen simultaneously. Grief doesn't have to leave to make way for growth. They know how to accompany each other, companion each other. At some point in time, when you allow grief to be assimilated into your life trajectory, it starts to create openings for post-traumatic growth to happen, a deeper existential growth to happen. So a season of grief starts to unfold invitation for growth. Now, this is another writing. I'll just take you through, and we don't have time, but we will be sharing some material. I'll be sharing the material with Evelyn and she'll forward it to you. Meanwhile, if you want to, I intended to do this much writing with you today in the webinar. This is about, growth. And this much I wanted you to do it at home as a follow-up thing, the one you see in amber. But we'll put all of this together in the material that Evelyn will be sending to you. Now, this is about, honoring your deceased loved one, remembering. Now, I must emphasize on what is remembering. What happens is in grief and loss and trauma, very often, several parts of our being feel completely torn apart and dismembered. Now, there's a way that writing can help you starting to remember those parts of your being and start to create a remembrance out of that. And there's a way that grief can help you also come to terms with your, sense of purpose, bring it back into your life by revisiting the legacy, a cause or a dream or a pursuit or a mission or an endeavor that your deceased loved one held dear to their heart. Something that you can now say that I want to take it up and take it forward in life. So you can create a legacy mission also, if that makes sense for you. So this is something that you can do in your private time. If you happen to take this book, it's here, Grief, Growth, Grace, A Sacred Pilgrimage. I wonder if you have it, Evelyn. Okay, Evelyn also has it. So in this, you will find several exercises, writing exercises, therapeutic writing exercises. I've called them word create worlds. This is the tagline of the constructionist principle in appreciative inquiry, and these are some of those exercises that I have listed here. But each chapter is also ending with a poetic affirmation where I write a tiny bit of poetic affirmation, then I prompt you to write and compose your own poetic affirmation. So if you like the book, go ahead and immerse in the therapeutic writing exercises and the therapeutic arts exercises and so many other things that await you in this book. Finally, I would conclude here with these words from my book. Embrace your pain, a tear at a time, a moan at a time, a lament at a time, and a prayer at a time. Thank you so much, Evelyn and the group, for this wonderful opportunity. I really loved being here. And I hope that today's session helps people in some way. Those of you who want to reach out to me, if you want to, this is the way you can reach out to me. And if you subscribe to my Substack newsletter, I write fortnightly on helping you become grief-wise. Thank you so much, and namaste, everyone. Be well in life. Learn to come to terms and be friends with your grief. And above all, remember to hope, love, and smile.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you so much. I think that this, excuse me, it's a little smoky here in New Jersey today, and I've been constantly clearing my throat, so my apologies. It's a meaningful read. I mean, it talks about growth after loss, I think, with such beauty and sensitivity. So I'm so honored to have had you with us today. Just a few things to wrap up here. So hopefully you are seeing the correct screen.
Can I interrupt you for a moment? I'm sorry.
Of course.
I just noticed that there's a question in the Q&A by Ashok Tilenia. Ashok, my heart really goes out to you, from a bereaved parent to another bereaved parent. And I would say that if you want, please feel free to reach out to me at growwithneena@gmail.com. Please feel free to reach out to me. Thank you. Over to you, Evelyn.
No, of course. So if there is anyone who is interested in being part of our community next year as a presenter, I have put a link in the chat, and I will also put it in our follow-up communications. We'd love to have you respond to our RFP for next year. And I also wanted to share, we have a survey. So as always, we want to know, how was this for you? Are there other topics or experts or people you would like us to connect with? We have tons of free resources on our webpage. We have our YouTube channel, which is where this video will ultimately live. And if you ever want to get in touch with me, I am Evelyn with 2 N's at good-grief.org. So thank you so much, everyone. I hope you have a wonderful day. And thank you, Neena.
Thank you so much.